but I don't know. He been having this little fake cough on and off. Like, it go away and come back. Like, right now, he just...
No, bitch, he's covered in blood.
No, he don't have a fever. He doesn't have a fever.
Nobody was ready for this. Not the fans. Not the internet. And definitely not Chrisean Rock herself. 1 minute it's chaos as usual, timelines screaming her name like it's a daily ritual, and the next minute silence. Not influencer silence. Not taking a break silence. The kind of silence that makes parents freeze, hearts stop, and phones start shaking. Because when whispers hit that Chrisean Jr. was struggling to breathe, suddenly the jokes disappeared, the memes paused, and everyone leaned forward like a secret just slipped through a cracked door. And let's be honest, this didn't feel like your average viral scare. This felt heavier, darker, the kind of moment that makes even the messiest reality TV drama look like a Disney Channel rerun. Sources say Chrisean Rock was begging for help, panic bleeding through every movement, every word, every second ticking louder than the last. The internet didn't just react, it combusted. Questions flew faster than facts. Blame, fear, and conspiracy collided like a 3-car pileup on a freeway made of rumors, because when a baby's health becomes the headline, suddenly everyone's an expert, everyone's a judge, and nobody's calm. And what happened next? That's where this story stops being gossip and starts feeling like a warning shot. The moment this story cracked open, it didn't arrive gently. It slammed into timelines like a glass door shattering in a quiet room. Because for Chrisean Rock, chaos is usually loud, messy, almost expected. But this was different. This wasn't a rant, a relationship blow-up, or another round of internet smoke. This was a baby struggling to breathe, and suddenly the jokes dried up faster than a celebrity apology. When whispers started circulating that Chrisean Jr. was choking, possibly dealing with fluid in his lungs, the tone shifted instantly. People stopped scrolling casually and started leaning in, because nothing cuts through celebrity nonsense faster than fear. Chrisean Rock has lived her entire public life in extremes. She's either trending for wild behavior or being dragged for choices that the internet loves to judge from a distance. Every move she makes gets magnified, memed, and monetized by people who don't know her but swear they understand her. So, when reports surfaced that she was begging for help, panic written all over her actions, it rattled even her harshest critics. This wasn't the usual circus. This felt raw. This felt like a private nightmare accidentally broadcast to millions. According to circulating accounts, the scare unfolded fast. One moment everything seemed normal, and the next, Chrisean Jr. was reportedly struggling to breathe, choking in a way that instantly flipped the switch from influencer life to emergency mode. And here's where the story gets messy, because facts moved slower than rumors. Some said it was fluid. Others said it was a medical complication. Others ran straight to blame like it was an Olympic sport. Because on the internet, nobody waits for confirmation when outrage is more entertaining than patience. The reason this hit harder is because Chrisean's motherhood has been under a microscope since day one. From pregnancy to postpartum, strangers have treated her life like a public trial. Every decision gets graded, every mistake gets amplified, and every moment of vulnerability becomes content for someone else's channel. So when word spread that her son was in distress, the reaction wasn't just concern. It was judgment dressed up as commentary. People weren't asking, is the baby okay? First, they were asking, who's at fault? Like they were waiting for a verdict instead of a heartbeat. What made it worse was the silence. No immediate clear statement. No calm explanation. Just fragments of information leaking out through social media cracks. And in that vacuum, panic thrives. Clips were replayed. Old videos resurfaced. Past controversies were dragged into the present like evidence in a courtroom that never closes. Suddenly, moments from months ago were being reinterpreted as warnings nobody listened to. Because hindsight is undefeated, especially when mixed with outrage and a Wi-Fi connection, behind all the noise, one thing stood out. Chrisean Rock didn't look performative. She didn't look like she was playing to the camera. Accounts described her as frantic, desperate, stripped of bravado. The same woman who usually laughs through chaos was reportedly begging for help like any terrified parent would, and that contrast shook people, because it reminded everyone that behind the viral persona is a real person who can't trend her way out of a medical scare. Of course, the internet didn't pause. It never does. While some expressed genuine concern, others sharpened their knives. Parenting experts appeared overnight. Armchair doctors started diagnosing from their couches. Comment sections turned into digital courtrooms, complete with accusations, theories, and zero qualifications. Some blamed stress. Some blamed lifestyle. Some blamed everyone except the fact that medical emergencies don't send calendar invites. They just show up and wreck everything. What added gasoline to the fire was Chrisean's history with controversy involving family dynamics, relationships, and public meltdowns. People connected dots that may not even belong on the same page. They questioned her stability. They questioned her support system. They questioned whether she should even be a mother, which is a line the internet crosses way too easily when it smells blood in the water. And once those questions start trending, compassion becomes optional. At the same time, supporters pushed back hard. They called out the hypocrisy of people who scream, "Protect children," while exploiting a child's medical scare for clicks and clout. They reminded everyone that no parent is immune to emergencies, that fear doesn't check your follower count, and that nobody deserves to have their worst moment turned into a spectator sport. For a brief moment, the internet fractured into two sides, those demanding accountability and those demanding humanity. What made this moment especially volatile was how fast it escalated. This wasn't a slow-burning scandal. This was a spark landing on dry grass. Within hours, headlines multiplied, narratives shifted, and speculation turned into assumed truth. The lack of verified information didn't slow anything down. It sped everything up. Because when people don't know what happened, they invent versions that fit their emotions. And emotions were running hot. There's also the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. Chrisean Rock has been labeled a problem for so long that many people were waiting for something like this to prove their opinions. That's the ugly side of internet culture. When someone is already controversial, empathy becomes conditional. Concern comes with an "I told you so" attached. And that's exactly what started creeping into the conversation as the scare unfolded. Still, through all the noise, one reality couldn't be ignored. A baby's breathing scare is not content. It's terror. It's the kind of moment that burns itself into a parent's memory forever. And whether people like Chrisean Rock or not, that fear doesn't change based on public opinion. It doesn't soften because you're famous. If anything, it gets heavier when you realize millions of strangers are watching your worst moment in real time. As the hours passed, the tension didn't ease. If anything, it thickened. People waited for updates. Like it was a season finale, refreshing feeds with nervous energy. Was Chrisean Jr. okay? Was he receiving care? Was this a one-time scare or something deeper? And with every unanswered question, speculation grew louder. Because silence on the internet is never neutral. It gets interpreted, twisted, and weaponized. This was no longer just about a health scare. It was about reputation, motherhood, public judgment, and the brutal way the internet handles vulnerability. Chrisean Rock wasn't just facing a terrifying moment as a parent. She was facing it under stadium lights, with millions of critics screaming from the stands. And the scariest part, this was only the beginning. Because once a story like this breaks, it doesn't fade quietly. It mutates, it spreads, and it leaves scars long after the headlines move on. The tension didn't cool down after the initial shock. It multiplied, it spread, it mutated into something far bigger than a single medical scare. Because once the internet smells vulnerability mixed with controversy, it doesn't observe quietly. It devours. As updates stayed unclear and official confirmations lagged behind, Speculation, the narrative escaped Chrisean Rock's control completely. The story was no longer about what actually happened. It became about what people wanted to believe happened, and that distinction is where chaos thrives. Celebrity reaction. Culture kicked in almost immediately. Influencers who had never mentioned Chrisean Rock before suddenly found her name rolling off their tongues like they were longtime observers. Some claimed concern while making sure their ring light was perfectly positioned. Others used prayers up captions like hashtags, stacking sympathy with monetization. It was the digital equivalent of crying while checking engagement metrics. Because nothing says empathy like tragedy with a thumbnail. Memes followed, because of course they did. Dark humor crept into corners of the internet that pretend they're joking but are really just numb. Side-by-side images appeared comparing Chrisean's past chaotic moments with captions implying inevitability, like this was some scripted plot twist instead of a real child's health scare. It was sick, but it was predictable. The internet loves irony more than responsibility, and sarcasm travels faster than compassion every single time. Then came the so-called experts. Overnight pediatricians with usernames like TruthSpeaker87 started explaining lung fluid like they just finished a residency via Google search. Threads exploded with medical terms ripped out of context, twisted into fear bait. One tweet would say this can be deadly, another would scream, "This happens all the time," and somehow both would go viral simultaneously. Confusion became currency. Fear became fuel. Pop culture comparisons flooded in, because everything has to be compared to something else to feel real. People said this was worse than reality TV scandals, darker than influencer breakdowns, more unsettling than celebrity custody battles. Some even dragged in past infamous celebrity parenting controversies, as if tragedy needs a historical playlist. Suddenly, Chrisean Rock was being placed in the same sentence as figures whose lives imploded publicly, like this scare was step one in a documentary nobody asked for but everyone was already narrating. What really escalated things was the question people kept asking without realizing how cruel it sounded. Why does this keep happening around her? That sentence floated through comment sections like a loaded weapon. It implies pattern. It implies fault. It implies destiny. And once that implication lands, public opinion hardens fast. Sympathy becomes conditional, like a subscription you can cancel the moment someone fails to meet your moral expectations. Meanwhile, Chrisean Rock's silence, or at least the lack of a clear, calm update, became its own storyline. Every minute, without clarification, was treated like evidence. Silence was read as guilt by some, shock by others, strategy by a few. The reality that someone might be overwhelmed, terrified, or simply focused on their child didn't trend as hard as theories did. Because calm explanations don't go viral, suspicion does. Public outrage didn't stay contained to comment sections. It spilled into reaction videos, live streams, stitched clips, and dramatic breakdowns that stretched minutes of uncertainty into hours of monetized speculation. Everyone had a take. Everyone had a tone. Some were angry. Some were smug. Some were disturbingly entertained. And through it all, Chrisean Rock became less of a person and more of a symbol for whatever argument people wanted to win that day. Supporters tried to shift the conversation, but they were swimming upstream. They reminded people that medical emergencies don't ask permission, that panic doesn't look polished, that not every crisis fits neatly into a morality play. But empathy doesn't algorithm well. Outrage does. Judgment does. And so the loudest voices weren't the most reasonable ones. They were the most extreme. What made the situation even messier was the way old clips resurfaced. Moments taken completely out of context were stitched together like some Frankenstein montage, implying foresight that probably didn't exist. A laugh here, a joke there. Suddenly, those moments were being reframed as negligence, as if joy at any point disqualifies you from fear later. That's the internet's favorite trick, rewriting history to fit the current headline. Celebrity acquaintances added to the chaos without even trying. Vague posts about protecting children and speaking truth popped up, with no names mentioned but everyone knowing exactly who they were aimed at. It was passive-aggressive morality theater, and it poured gasoline on a fire that was already out of control. Because when insiders hint without clarity, the public fills in the blanks with the worst possibilities. At the same time, something uncomfortable happened. People started watching Chrisean Rock differently, not just as a controversial figure, but as a mother under siege. For some, that softened the edges. For others, it sharpened their knives. The divide grew deeper. One side saw a terrified parent drowning under scrutiny. The other saw confirmation of everything they already believed. And neither side was really listening to the other. The memes got uglier. The jokes got colder. And the language shifted from concern to condemnation. Words like unfit, reckless, and irresponsible were thrown around like facts instead of opinions. That shift matters, because once language hardens, public perception follows. And perception, in the celebrity world, can be more damaging than truth. All of this happened while the actual situation remained painfully human and painfully uncertain. A baby had a breathing scare, a mother panicked, and millions of strangers turned that moment into content. It exposed something bigger than Chrisean Rock. It exposed how quickly the internet turns fear into entertainment and empathy into a bargaining chip. By this point, the story had outgrown its origin. It wasn't just about Chrisean Jr. anymore. It was about motherhood under a microscope, about how society treats women who don't fit the acceptable mold, about how fast people weaponize concern when judgment feels more satisfying. This wasn't a scandal in the traditional sense. It was a collision between vulnerability and a culture addicted to spectacle, and as the noise reached its peak, one thing became unavoidable. No matter how this specific scare resolved, the damage was already done. Reputations had been questioned, narratives had been cemented, and the internet had chosen sides like it always does, long before all the facts were even on the table. The aftermath was already forming in real time. You could feel it in the tone shift, in the comments that stopped asking questions and started making declarations. The story wasn't cooling off. It was setting the stage for consequences that would ripple far beyond this moment. Because once public opinion locks in, it doesn't loosen easily. And Chrisean Rock was about to find out just how heavy that weight can be. By the time the noise started settling, the damage had already seeped into places no headline could undo. This wasn't one of those scandals that burns hot and disappears by the next news cycle. This one lingered. It stuck to reputations, relationships, and public memory like smoke in fabric, even as updates suggested the immediate danger had passed. The internet didn't exhale. It leaned in harder, because survival doesn't end a story anymore. It just changes the angle. Chrisean Rock emerged from the fog visibly altered, not rebranded, not media trained, just changed. The bravado that usually coats her presence felt thinner, like armor worn too long under pressure. When she did resurface publicly, every word was dissected. Every tone shift became a clue. People weren't listening to understand. They were listening to confirm whatever narrative they had already chosen. Relief didn't trend. Lingering suspicion did. What followed was a subtle but unmistakable shift in how she was discussed. Before, she was chaos-coded entertainment. After the scare, she became a cautionary tale in the mouths of critics and a symbol of survival for supporters. Neither role was fair, but fairness doesn't survive virality. Brands went quiet. Collaborators hesitated. The same internet that once thrived off her unpredictability now questioned whether she was too risky. And in the celebrity ecosystem, risk doesn't mean danger. It means inconvenience. Motherhood became the loudest battlefield. Every future move involving her child was prejudged before it even happened. A smile was scrutinized. A laugh was questioned. Silence was condemned. Speaking up was labeled damage control. It didn't matter what she did. The lens had changed. Permanently. Because once the internet decides you're a story about responsibility, you're never allowed to be human again. Relationships around her didn't escape the blast radius either. Allies grew quieter. Enemies grew bolder. People who once benefited from her chaos now distanced themselves like they'd never shared the same room. And those who disliked her felt newly validated, as if a medical scare granted them moral authority. It was the ugliest kind of aftermath, where fear gets rewritten as proof. The public also changed. Comment sections became colder, less reactive, and more declarative. People weren't asking questions anymore. They were making statements. That's when you know a narrative has solidified. The empathy window closed fast. Because outrage has a shelf life, but judgment is forever. And once judgment becomes normalized, it disguises itself as concern while doing real damage. What's rarely acknowledged is how this kind of moment traps someone in time. No matter what Chrisean Rock does next, this scare will be dragged into the conversation like a shadow. Every argument will circle back to it. Every criticism will reference it. It becomes the unsaid sentence at the end of every paragraph. That's the price of public vulnerability in an era that mistakes access for entitlement. Meanwhile, the internet moved on to the next crisis like it always does, leaving behind fragments of outrage and half-remembered facts. But Chrisean didn't get to move on. Parents don't get that luxury. Fear like that doesn't evaporate. It embeds. It rewires how you breathe, how you sleep, how you react to silence. And doing that under public surveillance adds a layer of pressure most people can't even imagine. The most unsettling part is what this moment revealed about us, not her. We watched a terrified parent and immediately asked who to blame. We treated uncertainty like entertainment. We turned a child's health scare into a referendum on character. And then we acted shocked when the situation felt ugly. It was always going to feel ugly, because the system rewards reaction, not reflection. For Chrisean Rock, the consequences are still unfolding. Trust doesn't rebuild overnight. Public perception doesn't reset with one update. And the internet never apologizes. It just scrolls. Whether she adapts, retreats, or doubles down remains to be seen. What's clear is that the margin for error has shrunk to nothing. One more misstep, real or imagined, will be treated as confirmation, not coincidence. This isn't closure. It's a pause. A quiet, uneasy breath before the next headline decides to knock. Because in this world, stories don't end. They evolve. And controversy doesn't fade. It waits. Chrisean Rock's life has always been loud, but now it carries an echo that won't disappear easily. And that's the real aftermath. Not the tweets. Not the think pieces. Not the reaction videos. It's the permanent shift in how a human being is allowed to exist in public after fear becomes content. This scare didn't just test her resilience. It exposed the cruelty of a culture that claims to care while sharpening its knives. One thing is certain, this won't be the last chapter. The curiosity is already circling, hungry for what comes next. And whether the next moment is redemption, relapse, or something entirely unexpected, the internet will be waiting, fingers hovering over record, ready to turn another private moment into a public spectacle. Now, before you scroll away pretending this didn't hit a nerve, let's be honest with each other. If this story made you uncomfortable, that's the point. If it made you angry, conflicted, or even question how fast we judge people online, congratulations, you were actually paying attention. Because scandals like this don't just expose celebrities, they expose us. And if you're still here, it means you know there's more going on beneath the headlines than the internet wants you to think. So don't sit there quietly. This is where you speak. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this genuine concern gone too far? Or did the internet cross a line it can't uncross? Say it loud. Argue it out. Just don't pretend you didn't have a reaction. And while you're at it, smash that like button like it owes you money, because these deep dives don't survive without your support. Algorithms don't care about nuance, but they do care about engagement. If you're new here, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't stop. They evolve. Today it's a health scare. Tomorrow it's the fallout. Next week it's another never saw this coming moment that somehow everyone saw coming. This channel doesn't just report the chaos, we rip it open, dissect it, and show you the parts nobody wants to talk about. Share this video with someone who thinks celebrity drama is harmless entertainment. Let them see how fast clicks turn into cruelty. Let them sit with that discomfort for a second. Because awareness starts with conversation, and conversation starts right here. Scandals don't sleep. The internet doesn't forget. And if you want the real story behind the noise, you already know where to be. This is Fame Ripple, where every headline has consequences,